Welcome to today's Supplier Insight with Jigcar. Now, they're supplying an advanced transport solution for AM100 dealerships. They were only launched last year and is focused on tackling the significant and largely overlooked problem of transport planning across car dealer groups. They were founded by a team with deep experience in automotive and transport technology, and it already counts the likes of franchise groups such as Glyn Hopkins, Stephen Eagle, and Paris as customers. It's not hard to see why. Jigcar has attracted the backing of key industry figures in terms of early investment, and it is also steered by a team whose members have held senior positions in businesses such as Nissan, Hyundai, Vindis, and industry disruptor Kazoo. Today's Chief Executive Elliot Perks talks to AM about how its intelligent AI-driven platform can radically optimize vehicle movements for AM dealerships. Elliot, hello. Welcome to today's Supplier Insight. Now, let's get some idea about the market and the challenges. Your team is highly knowledgeable about the complexity of transportation in motor retail. But can you explain the current challenges that dealership groups face in managing car transport between sites and customers?
Definitely. So there's a couple of key challenges really. One is pure visibility on cost. So when you've got multiple sites operating obviously with their own P&Ls, but they're often operating their own transport processes as well. And so at a group level, it's really hard to see what am I spending in terms of both fleet and retail movements. And so one of the first things we try and work towards is, right, how do you see across your group, how many cars are moving, how many cars are going to customers, going back from customers, what are you spending per mile, what are you spending per movement, and where are the efficiencies or inefficiencies that can be gained, including, do you employ loads of internal drivers that you didn't know about? Do you use third parties that aren't insured or have really high rates, that kind of thing? But one of the big challenges coming out of this year, particularly based on last year, is the sheer cost of fleet movements. We are seeing more and more fleet deliveries, obviously, because of the increase of fleet from a new perspective. Those deliveries always going to customers' houses, often on transporters, not trade plates, because they're new EVs. And that's really driving up the cost. We spoke to a group recently that spent £2.4 million last year on just fleet deliveries, cost them £250 per movement. So yeah, it's a big opportunity, a big cost center. And I would say the first core thing to focus on with groups really is visibility, and then streamlining where those costs can be improved.
Okay, so why is it being overlooked then as an issue?
I think it's sort of just catching up with the way the industry has changed. Perhaps, if even going back 5-6 years ago, where omnichannel was less of an adopted method of selling, I think fewer cars were moving around. Since the sort of wide adoption of omnichannel, you have many more movements taking place. From key loop data we saw last year across the industry, 38% of all retail cars sold, new and used, were sold from a different site to the one they were currently sat on. So you've got all this cross-selling happening. A sales manager at site A sells a car to a customer at that site that's currently at site C, and that car moves. So more movements have just started happening when the model has changed over the past few years, and suddenly transport costs have jumped. And then you fold in the EV salary sacrifice schemes and the boost of fleet and how many cars being delivered to customers or buying from the private market, from places like CarWow or Motorway. Moving cars has just become fundamental to selling cars, and it's happening way more.
Okay, so what differentiates Jigcar from a lot of other transportation software solutions that dealerships will already be using?
So there isn't, we don't have a direct competitor in terms of transport software. There is no player in the market that has gone out and said, right, dealer group, we're going to help you streamline your transport at a group level across all the various ways within which you move a car, whether it's a marketplace, whether it's a third-party provider or set of third-party providers, whether it's internal drivers or subcontracted drivers. So we look holistically and manage all of those movements through the platform. It's very much operational software. We don't actually move cars. We're not a marketplace. The only solutions to the logistics problem that have appeared are marketplaces, but it isn't practical or cost effective to use a marketplace, especially as a big group, for all of your movements. And you do also risk subcontracting to smaller outfits who aren't actually properly insured to be moving cars, especially as EVs get heavier and bigger. And that can have severe consequences if something goes wrong for the group.
So what are the particular problems that EVs pose in terms of transportation? You say they're heavy. So does that restrict the number of transporters, the number of cars that can go on transporters?
Yeah, it's a couple of things really. Because of the weight of them, you need to make sure the transporter that's carrying them is fully equipped to do that. And so a single car transporter that may have been fine for a petrol 4x4 is often maybe not going to be okay for a very heavy 4x4 EV. And sometimes these are being moved around, therefore, in a way that isn't insured. That's why you've got to make sure that when you're working with third parties, they're properly vetted, really established outfits. So where we work with dealer groups who want a third party model or a hybrid model with a lot of third party movements, we go out and speak to those bigger providers, agree rates with them based on forecast volumes, which brings rates down. We help them agree SLAs, so cars are moved within as quick a period as possible, and then manage that as if they're almost an internal logistics team through the platform. Huge efficiencies can be gained. So yeah, EVs are definitely a part of the problem at the moment.
Yes. Are you seeing a lot of dealership groups making that mistake, doing that?
I think that accidentally, because it's not clear what the risks are associated to them. But I wouldn't say that's the biggest problem in the industry. The biggest problem is there is very hard to see what's actually being spent and very hard to implement a group-wide transport strategy when you don't have the software or the support to implement it and then monitor it, which is where we step in. And part of fixing that problem always ends up being we actually fix the compliance problem as well, because we're not going to go to one-man bands and say they should be moving cars for a dealer group with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 sites. That just doesn't make any sense anyway. We're going to go to the bigger, more established providers who are fully vetted, fully insured. And the benefits you're going to get from that, because you say to them, right, this is how much volume they're going to do, is a provider says, okay, in that case, I can do a better rate because I know I can budget for what's coming.
Okay, so Elliot, you're targeting AM100 dealerships. Why is a group level transport strategy so important in today's market?
Yeah, we are mainly targeting AM100 dealer groups, although we're actually having many more conversations than I thought we would have with smaller groups.
Right.
We have a couple of sites where they might have a central prep facility, so cars are going to and from that prep facility all the time, or they're buying from the private market, so they're bringing loads of cars inbound. But yeah, our core focus is the AM100 groups, where we've now got 5 that work with us at a group level. Sorry, what was the actual question again?
Why is it so important to have that group level strategy?
Of course, yeah. All the benefits for transport come by looking at your network at a group level. If we take one of the groups we work with, when we started working with them, they found they had 52 different providers across about 40 sites. And so what we did is we streamlined that down to just 2 providers, better rates, quicker days to move that's agreed contractually, and a handful of internal drivers where they wanted them. And that's where you get the real benefits, because you can forecast volumes. You can look and say, right, I've got movements going from A to B, and I've also got movements going from B to A. Instead of 2 drivers doing that and I'm spending double, actually one driver can go from there to there and there to there. So when it comes to logistics and transport, you have to look across your entire network for that to work. And that's why I think there's so much opportunity, really, because it's moving from a site-by-site approach to a centralized approach, which is, really exciting in terms of the opportunity we see from a cost and speed perspective.
Yeah. How does the AI, the intelligence-driven aspect of it work?
So the first thing we had to do last year, AI is useless without any data, and we're going, starting in transport and automotive, and no groups really had much data on these are the ways in which we're moving cars. So we've built up an incredible pool of data for our customers now in terms of where they're moving cars to and from. The first way we've implemented AI, which we've just launched in January, is enabling you to query all of your logistics data to find out anything you need to know. So imagine you're executive of a dealer group, you want to know like which sites do I have the most failed movements to and from, aborted movements, which I pay for, what's my average cost per mile, which sites have the most volume going in and out of. Like any question you might have, you can now answer that by just querying your data in Jigcar, which we've trained this model specifically on automotive logistics, which is really exciting. But going forward, what we're focusing on now is how do you look at all movements that are coming into Jigcar and start to optimize to make suggestions for the best resource you could use in terms of cost and speed. So if I have a couple of third parties and I have rates agreed, which we put through the platform and we know those, I have some internal drivers, I have 10 movements come in to Jigcar across my different sites over the course of the day. Jigcar listens and learns and looks back at the data from your previous movements and says, right, based on what you're trying to achieve here and the deadline of that movement and whether cost is what matters the most or a specific delivery date, then this is the movement we would recommend. And that's where I think we can start to use AI to see huge efficiency gains, which is really exciting. But it's definitely a journey to get there because there was no data before.
Yes, great. Okay, so the industry is increasingly shifting to fulfill omni-channel and all the variety of sales channels that exist. And how do your transport strategies need to evolve, or the industry's transport strategies need to evolve to meet the demands of this new environment?
Yeah, so one of the things that can be like misconstrued is that we're trying to focus on customer deliveries and customer pickups. And for some groups, that is a large volume, especially where fleet comes in. But actually, the main movements that are happening in omnichannel are site-to-site movements because of what I said earlier of a customer coming into site C and a sales manager selling them a car that's in site A. They saw a car that's at site A, they reserve it, it moves to site C. And that makes up a huge bulk of movements. And with every single group we've spoken to, we've worked with, the number of those movements in reality has been so much higher than what was expected before going through the process of diving deep into the data with each site, which we do. We get so hands-on with each of the sites. It's basically like free consulting before we've even signed a contract. We have to do that. We have to build up a picture of what's happening today. Yes. So that's one of the core things really is understanding like how many cars am I moving between different sites and how many retail deliveries and pickups am I doing, often driven actually by fleet, not retail.
You say that dealerships underestimate the number of movements that actually in reality exist. What sort of percentage could you say? Is it 50%? Is it double?
Really depends. It really does depend on the group, but the UK-wide statistic we have from franchise dealer groups is 38% of all retail cars sold last year were cross-sold from different sites. Obviously, more used cars are moved than new cars, but new cars are 100% still moving. I'd say among our customer base, it's sort of 75% used car movements, 25% new car movements. So it's not that new, and that's for site-to-site movements. Obviously, for fleet deliveries to customers, they're all new cars.
Yes, okay. So let's talk about your early success stories. You're a very young business, but you've got a fantastic experienced team behind you. So you said earlier, didn't you, that you're already working with 5 AM100 dealerships. What sort of measurable success and outcomes have these early adopters demonstrated?
Yeah, so one of the key things there's 2 key things we care about. One is the cost of a movement, the actual cost of a movement, which goes all the way down to what's your cost per mile per car. That's one. The other thing is speed. So if it costs you £40 a day at the moment to hold stock in terms of interest, depreciation, if you've got movements that are happening between sites where there's a customer on the other side, but you're still holding that stock and it takes 5 days instead of 2, you've held that car for an extra 3 days and spent an extra 120 quid a day. Sorry, 120 quid total before you even considered the cost of that movement. So we very much look at cost and speed because there's huge opportunities there. And if you increase speed, obviously you reduce days to sell, increase your stock turn. And we've seen this year lots of publications. I think AM put something out about it last week of the days to sell on average went up two days last year. And so transport is a great opportunity to bring that back. You can save a few days.
Okay, so you talked about it's not just AM 100 dealerships, but as a general rule of thumb, what can dealerships actually learn about what you're providing and what they can achieve as well?
Yeah, so if we take, like with 2 of our customers, we've reduced their time to move vehicles by 2 days. So that's been through a method of doing different things. It's by monitoring the performance of their third parties and helping them renegotiate better days to move. Now they actually have the data. They can see on a day-by-day, car-by-car, week-by-week basis, this is how long it's taking me to move vehicles, and therefore I need it to be this. And that feeds into the negotiation with the different third-party providers. So if you've got a third-party transport strategy, they're one of the core things we look at, as well as what are your actual rates and how can you bring those down based on volumes. So that's one of the core wins we've had so far. For groups where they're more internal focused, where they have subcontracted drivers, we've helped them streamline the number of drivers they've actually got on their books, which can in some case bring down your cost by a quarter, by half in terms of number of drivers, and also enable your drivers to get more done in a day. So with one of our groups we went live with in January that have a fully internal model, they think on average their drivers are doing 2-3 movements a day, but we now see it that can be high as 5 or 6 movements a day. So if you've employed that driver particularly, you're getting double the value out of that driver in a single day, and this can represent hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds of movements. Of savings for groups. We think in one of our cases, actually, the saving is £41,000 per site per year at that group.
Right, that's quite substantial. How long does it take for you to get a good picture? You say you do an awful lot of work with a dealership to actually go back to them with a proposition of what you can do for them. How long does that initial fact-finding mission take?
To be honest, it really depends on the group. Sometimes it's really quick. Sometimes it's two calls with a couple of people. You know what the setup is. You get them set up on the platform. That takes about a week, and you're up and running. And then you look at the data over the course of a few months and start to say, right, here are the efficiencies you can get at a full network level. So it can be really, really quick. It can be just a couple of meetings, a couple of calls. We try and meet people face to face as much as possible. Sometimes it can be a bit more complicated. It can be a lot more to unpick. And we try drive through that process as quickly as possible. Before we get them on the platform, we're not trying to get to every single little piece of information. It might be as simple as, here's a spreadsheet, go to your general managers and get them to fill out, these are the drivers I employ, these are the third parties we use, these are the rates. You get that in one spreadsheet, and we start to see, right, do we implement this through the platform, this network setup you've currently got? Or do we think there are recommendations we can already make at that point and get them up and running on the platform with a more streamlined process, at which point we'll go out on their behalf if they're happy for us to and help them find better solutions. So long answer to a question, but it can be really quick because they might have quite a simple setup. It can take a few weeks. Then the real benefit comes from when you have them in the platform for 2-3 months worth of data. Our transport director, who we just hired, will sit down with our groups and say, right, these are the areas where I think we can see consolidation. These are the areas where we can bring down your cost per mile and your speed up. So 3 months usage in the platform is a pretty good time with which we have enough data built up to start making the really exciting recommendations for going forward.
Okay. So what's the visibility like on the platform? Who can actually see you see progress? Is it federated to multiple sites and multiple
so
users?
the process is through the platform that every site has access to Jigcar, and instead of calling up a random third party or emailing them and putting in the VRM or the VIN number and saying move this car, you just click on your piece of stock. We have a stock view from the DMS, say this needs to move from here to here, or these cars need to move from here to here. It's fleet or retail, it's customer to business to customer, or site to site, and ultimately request that movement. And that goes through to the third parties who we also set up on Jigcar, or to your internal drivers who use the driver app, or your central transport team if you have one, which very few groups actually do. So everyone is set up on it. And then in terms of the analytics at a group level, you can drill down all the way to a car level. You can see how many times did this car move? How much did I spend moving this specific car in relation to the margin of the vehicle? But you can also look on a group level and see how long is it taking me to move cars in days across my different providers or internal drivers? What's it costing me at each site to move vehicles? So you really get that full holistic picture of the group level transport, and you can go as deep as you want into a car or site or provider or driver level.
So Jigcar aims to bring transport to the forefront of cost-cutting strategies. And what steps are you taking to educate the industry?
I think it's just about, we're not trying to come in and say, we know everything about automotive retail. We spent a few years at Cazoo. We've built a management team around us that are very, very experienced in automotive retail, executives of leading dealer groups and OEMs. But one of the core things we are trying to bring to the forefront is highlighting in 2025, when interest has started really high and is going to continue being high to the end of the year, and has already been a brutal period. Transport is an area where there are massive, massive cost savings to be had. But it's not really spoken about. Often the cost of movements are hidden in the accounts, they're buried, the speed of movements isn't clear. And that's limiting stock turn and increasing days to sell. So we're just trying to bring transport to the forefront as you're looking everywhere to cut costs at the moment. Maybe this isn't an area you've looked at yet, or maybe you don't realize quite how much there is to save in this area. So that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to say, hey, have a look at transport, speak to us. If you don't get anything from it, fine. We'll dive into your data, learn some stuff if that's useful, and see how big the opportunity could be for you.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of intrigued by how this issue has arisen. Why has it got so bad? Is it because people have just overlooked it, or is it a situation that most dealerships find themselves in? Has it just got worse and worse and worse?
From what I hear, it was the same in every retail industry as they adopted omnichannel. The customer proposition goes ahead quicker than the operational sort of proposition that underpins it cost effectively. Yeah. It's just a pretty natural thing that happens. Like, you're going to focus on the customer proposition first, and other stuff is going to catch up. And I think one of the key things potentially that happened was when dealers adopted omnichannel, it was during the boom of used car, for example, prices are actually going up when they're on a forecourt. So in that year, as you're starting to move more cars, you're not really noticing dent to the P&L because the rest of the business is doing so well. Whereas now, as that has changed, maybe it's more obvious what the impact has been.
Yes.
But we heard this be the case in other retail industries that adopted omnichannel a bit earlier. Like if you take, fashion, for example, it's only now that, a few years later, they started to really think about transport as a core part of the retailing model.
Yeah. Okay. So just tell me, take a step back in your Cazoo days. Were you seeing this in Cazoo, and did you have this idea? You think this is so right for the industry to adopt?
Yeah, I think when we were at Cazoo, they had 400 software engineers, and they were moving tens of thousands of cars, but they still didn't want to build transport software in-house. Really? It's a bit like building banking infrastructure. Like, you don't want to do that. It's not core, and it needs a lot of maintenance and a lot of bespoke development. So we were sent off to try find solutions to manage movements across third-party providers, internal drivers, trade plate drivers, trucks, like everything. And we just found the only solutions out there are built for moving parcels and fast-moving consumer goods. And we tried and spent lots of money on these software solutions. It didn't work, ended up back on spreadsheets. And, it was very, very, very painful. What we did feel at Kazoo at that time throughout that process was the standard retail model of people going to sites, buying cars is going to persist. And so we knew there are only so many Kazoos in the world. We wanted to go and speak to more traditional retailers. How are you moving many cars? How do you manage that process? And it's just through that natural sort of like curiosity around that problem that we started to see this opportunity open up. And now it's very much there. So that was the journey, really. It was got a bit interested by it at Kazoo, and then it became a huge rabbit hole that's sort of now our lives, that is Jigcar.
Yes, well, and very successful as well in your very, still so early for the business. Business has had additional funding, hasn't it? It's gone through a successful funding round. How do you see Jigcar evolving in the future?
Yeah, so we raised our first funding round last year, just under $1 million. The plan for this year really is to keep a lot of focus on the UK, really trying to focus on fleet and retail movements and how we can bring those costs down for the biggest dealer groups in the UK, and really trying to show through case studies through our early customers quite how impactful that can be, because I think it's pretty astounding when you can see it, like how much of an impact you can make. So that really is the core focus right now. It's the UK market, fleet and retail, but we're also starting to look at after sales as well, where we're seeing a lot of movements to and from customers as part of after sales customer offerings. And what we're starting to see, because we probably weren't asking enough questions about this last year, is actually the after sales teams also have drivers that they're employing or using third parties. So it's another part of the network to look at holistically to streamline operations. So that's an exciting one for us to look a bit more at this year is after sales, but very much a core UK focus this year.
Okay, I'm sure you'll come back to us and tell us all your progress very soon. Just quite interesting. Obviously, you brought a fresh approach to the industry. And how do you see this contributing to a broader understanding of operational efficiencies? Where else may these gains be delivered?
Yeah, I think we're pretty laser focused on transport and automotive. We don't have any plans as a business to go outside of automotive at all. We're very much building an automotive focused company. I think there's lots of gains in our in our field anyway, to really start linking up these really solid providers with the bigger dealers and getting efficiencies across both sides, with looking at what is the ultimate network setup if you want to implement internal drivers. Like, there's so much to do and to think about in terms of cost and speed of movements to align to your sales model. So yeah, there's so many things to do, and I think we're only just scratching the surface of it today.
Yes. My last question, Elliot, was you've talked about short and medium term goals, but sometimes you dream about what Jigcar could be in 10 years. And what is your vision for the business?
Our vision is to stay very much within automotive and really, focus on transport. We definitely will look at other geographic markets. We're doing a little bit of research in a couple of countries at the moment. So, we are ultimately looking to build a global software business, but we'll get the mandate to do that by doing really well in the UK market, improving value for customers in the UK market. So, yes, I try not to get too caught up in what Jigcar could be in 10 years. I think there is a big global opportunity, but right now it's just every day just thinking about the UK value proposition.
Yes. Elliot, it's been wonderful to talk to you today. You keep us abreast of all the developments, won't you?
Will do. Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy.